conversation started. So I would love to ask each of our panelists to take just a minute or two to briefly introduce yourself and to share a bit about your organization and what you do in your current role. We're going to start this one off in roughly alphabetical order. So Sarah, I'm going to have you go first.
Great. Thank you so much, Marissa. And thank you to all of you for being here. It's such a pleasure to be back at Wellesley. I wish it were in person, but this is great to see all of you. So as Marissa said, my name is Sarah Bidgood. I direct the Eurasia Non-Proliferation Program at a non-governmental organization called the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. We're based in Monterey, California, and we are part of Big M Middlebury. So Middlebury in Vermont is the institution you may be most familiar with, but we are based at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. And what the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies does is it combats the spread of weapons of mass destruction, or WMD, by training the next generation of non-proliferation specialists and disseminating timely information and analysis. So in essence, we are both an education and training institution, but also a producer and disseminator of policy relevant research. And so my work sits at the nexus of those two spaces. A lot of my current work is focused on thinking about ways to facilitate cooperation between the United States and Russia, the two largest nuclear weapon states, on preventing the spread of weapons of mass destruction and on arms control issues. But my colleagues cover the whole host of sort of non-proliferation and arms control issues. So we're really working on a lot of these different spaces. And I'm looking forward to a great conversation. So back to you, Marissa.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Jillian, why don't you go next?
Hi, my name is Jillian Cuttner. I graduated from Wellesley in 2017. I currently work as an associate at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a large defense contracting firm which serves clients in the defense space, also commercial and federal spaces as well. For the past 3 years, I've been an on-site wargaming analyst at OSD Cape, which is the Office of the Secretary of Defense's Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Unit at the Pentagon. What we do varies a lot, but in essence, our primary role is supporting the Deputy Secretary's strategic portfolio reviews. Every year, the Deputy Secretary and her designees select 3 to 5 analytical topics that we provide support for, which inform resourcing decisions within the department. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to chatting with you guys and taking your questions.
Thanks, Jillian. How about you, Becca?
Hi all, my name is Becca Lucas. I graduated in 2014, so Jillian and I overlapped. I currently work as an analyst with RAND Europe. So we're related to, but not the same as the RAND Corporation in the US that you may have heard of. And we kind of sit at the cross point between a consultancy and a think tank. So we do a lot of work focusing on trends in the defense space, what's going on in terms of new systems, new doctrine. Most of our work is for the Ministry of Defense here in the UK, but we do respond to calls. So it's unlike a think tank. We're not necessarily either just going out and pitching to corporations or businesses. We actually don't take any money from corporations. And we're also, bidding for contracts as they're made available. So some of my colleagues also do work for, the UN and for doing some work for the European Commission right now. So yes, and apologies if I'm a little bit tired. It's 10 here, so.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Mueller. I graduated Wellesley in 2002. I work for the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I'm an analyst. The Defense Intelligence Agency is one of, I think there's something like 15 to 20 intelligence agencies within the intelligence community of the United States government. So the intelligence agencies we don't set US policy, rather we provide context for US policymakers, including we provide warning, we do opportunity analysis, basically telling them, assessing for them what reactions might be if they try X, Y, or Z. And we assess the implications of various things going on in the world. So the agency at which I work, the Defense Intelligence Agency, is one of the two truly all-source agencies, the other being CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. And it's what you might imagine what makes us distinct is that our focus is on defense. We're both agencies that both provide analysis and have a collection component. My present role is as, well, actually, my present role is as an instructor for analysts, basically teaching new analysts and providing refresher courses for mid-career analysts. But the bulk of my career has been focused on analysis pertaining to Russia and to a lesser but significant extent, other former Soviet states surrounding Russia. I've done both defense econ analysis and various types of like strategic and military analysis. Oh, it's so terrible because I work for the Department of Defense. I have a tendency to say over. So I'll just hand it back to you, Marissa.
Thank you, Laura. And then I see that our final panelist is just joining us now. Thank you so much for being here. Hi there. And I will let you go ahead. We were just doing a quick introduction. So who you are, when you graduated, where you currently work, and a little overview of your current role.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Jana Malekis Smith. I'm a professor at West Point in the Department of Systems Engineering. I just finished teaching my last course for this semester, so I apologize for joining the call a bit later. In addition to my work as a professor at West Point, I am also a senior associate with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. It's a national security think tank where I conduct research on cybersecurity, international relations, and space security as well. Space and cyber are my two passion areas, and if any of you in the Q&A have similar interests in those areas, I am more than happy to field questions and be of help. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, all of you. So I'd like to start off with sort of a general question. You've talked a little bit about your interests, and even before the panel started, we were talking about the challenges while you were an undergrad of figuring out where to go with some of these interests and what your path might look like. So we have a lot of current students right now interested generally in international affairs. It's such a wide and varied field. You've just given us an overview of some of the directions somebody might want to go, and we know there are so many more. So I'd love to hear from whoever would like to share how you came to discover and focus on or specialize in your current area.
So I'm happy to jump in. I should add that I'm also a PhD student in my spare time at King's College London in Defense Studies. And I don't know about the other panelists, but I've definitely taken a slightly wandering route to get to where I am. I kind of fell into a job at Booz Allen Hamilton. As we were discussing before the panel, when I said I was interested in defense as a senior at Wellesley, basically the two options where that people said, well, you can join the Army or you can join the CIA. It's like, neither of those really seemed like a good fit. So I did 3.5 years at Booz Allen and then moved to the UK and spent a year kind of trying to find myself, doing temping jobs, short-term internships, worked for political risk agency, then spent a year working for a think tank, and now kind of have come back to the kind of overlap between consultancy and think tanking. So I mean, I think for me, it's been about, you read something or you see something, you're like, that's what I want. That's what I want to do. And you just follow that. I mean, it's easier said than done. And, temping work was not fun. But, for me, it's been about like, what is a job that I love and that I'm going to be willing to spend, the extra time, because as I'm sure everyone on this call will tell you, the 40-hour week is not a thing anymore, sadly. So yeah, just kind of following. And then for me, a combination of working and graduate school at the same time has been really helpful for me in trying to figure out what I want to do. So I did my master's while I was at Booz Allen at Georgetown, and then now I'm doing my PhD. First, with a think tank, and now with
I can piggyback on that a little bit, Marissa, in part because,
Mhm.
Rebecca, I'm also a PhD student at King's in the Defense Studies Department. So we are perhaps even in the same cohort. It's really great to know that I have a friend on the inside. But so my path was a little bit winding. I did my work at Wellesley in the Russian department, where I felt like I really found my home. I loved the Russian department, but I couldn't quite figure out how to apply that love of Russian to something that felt like it was related to the security field and wasn't necessarily following the career path that many people take who are interested in Russian, which is to become a Slavic studies professor or a Slavic linguist. I struggled to sort of figure out where I could apply this expertise, and it took me on a winding path. And I think if there's any advice I can impart to current students, perhaps as you're thinking about what things are going to look like finding a job in the midst of the pandemic, it's don't be afraid of the winding path. It can be really informative. It can tell you a lot about who you are as a person and what you like and what you don't like, even if you feel like you're doing a job that is not the thing you want to be doing for the rest of your life. And for me, the winding path took me to publishing. So I actually worked in publishing for about 5 years before I decided to go back to graduate school, get a second master's degree in non-proliferation and terrorism studies at the institute where I now work. But the publishing was great. A lot of my work involves submitting my articles for peer review, and I understand what happens when an article goes through peer review now, and I understand what that means and what that looks like. And that has been important for my professional development. So I guess if I could impart any wisdom, it's that, to the extent that you're able to kind of be ready to take opportunities that come your way and do things that sound interesting, even if they're not necessarily where you envisioned yourself going in the next 5 years, take those. You never know what's going to come down the pike. And for me, it ended up being a job that I love. And here I am now.
Thank you, Sarah. That's helpful. I feel like lots of times there are nerves around making a move that doesn't feel perfect, or it's not like right on the nose exactly feel right. And it's helpful to hear that perspective that you never know where it's going to lead, and it's all part of the process. Does anyone else have anything to add, or maybe a different perspective on that one? Or does it feel like we've covered that?
I could talk a little bit about how I got to be sort of where I'm at. So I think, like the others shared, and like I saw a lot when I was a student at Wellesley and attended events such as this, the path was circuitous. I personally applied to the CIA when I was a student at Wellesley, just shortly after 9/11. And like Sarah, I was a Russian major. I absolutely loved the Russian department. I was also a political science major, so I had some, social sciences background. And I was surprised to get a job with them working in their open source center, basically reading things in Russian and writing about them all the time. I did that for about 4 years. And at some point decided I wanted to go to graduate school. I was a little frustrated at times with the US government, wondered what else was out there. Went to graduate school at Johns Hopkins University School for Advanced International Studies, called SICE, which appealed to me because it has a program that focuses in part on economics. And I thought, well, that would be a good thing to have greater skills in. So after that, tried the private sector for a while, and actually I was tremendously bored. Like, I wanted to do something where I was in a more efficient environment, and I had this like tremendously boring private sector job. And I was laid off from that, ended up being like underemployed, but very happy for a while, working at Georgetown University. And at that time applied for the current job that I hold at the Defense Intelligence Agency, which I found on USA Jobs. I think I'm the only person I know who got into the IC through USA Jobs. And have just, done a bunch of different things in my current job, all of which I think my previous experience with language and like econ and so forth have proved helpful with.
So a few of you now have touched on what was going to be my next question. Students and also alums want to talk a lot, have a lot of questions, I think, about this educational background and educational progression, and whether a graduate degree, a master's or a doctoral degree is necessary, or when is it necessary. And I'm curious to hear, some of you have touched on this, you're doing your PhD now, or you've talked about being at SAIS. Just speaking a little bit to you in your experience, or how you would advise students or other alums, does that feel necessary right off the bat? Should one assume that a master's will be needed, or what has your experience been with your graduate school journey?
So my experience has been that at the entry level, it's not necessary to have a master's degree in the US government, and particularly in the intelligence community. We basically hire for people who have the ability to research, write, and think critically. I remember at some point considering getting a doctoral degree in my early years, and people telling me, some of them, my colleagues, that they sort of wish they hadn't gotten a PhD because they don't quote unquote use it. I know other people for whom a PhD is something of a parachute, like if you're tired of the intelligence community and you want out. It's more possible to make it more feasible to make a transition to, for instance, academia with a PhD. For me, I got a master's degree when I felt a bit pigeonholed in my initial job in the intelligence community. And at the time, I left full-time employment to get a master's degree because that's what my program required at the time. I think a lot of that has changed since like the 2008 recession. There's a lot less appetite, I think, for full-time international relations degrees out there. I'm pleased, I'm happy that I went and got a master's degree. I will say that mostly I think it hasn't helped my earnings potential per se. I think what it mostly did was to sort of like with an undergraduate degree, it made me sort of a better rounded person and gave me a lot of time and opportunity to think and explore.
So just to piggyback off of that, obviously Georgetown is way cooler than SAIS is the first thing. But the other piece of it would be that the only thing I think I would say that I have learned is like, definitely go and work before you go and get a master's. I'm working right now in the UK. It's a little bit different. Uni's only 3 years, so a lot of people have masters when they're entering the workforce. And I feel like I just was able to make so much better use of my master's and that whole experience because I had some work experience under my belt. So I knew both, the things that were just fun to do about grad school and the things that were really going to be important later. It also gave me a bit of perspective in terms of I've never had anyone ask me what my graduate school GPA was. That may be different if you attend full time, but it took some pressure off and really helped me. Sarah was talking about jobs that you don't necessarily love. My job at Booz Allen was nowhere near as cool as it sounds like Jillian's was. I was mostly doing project management stuff. That was really good training, but not intellectually stimulating at all. And so doing grad school at the same time kind of let me explore that and keep up that side of myself while I was making money and, saving to be able to move to the UK. So, I think definitely I would say, experience before grad school. And I'm a big fan of the part-time thing, to be honest. So.
I will jump in next. What I would say is, regardless of whether you have a JD at the end of your name or a PhD or an MA, fostering a lifelong commitment to being an ever curious learner is invaluable. That's really what it comes down to, and is a true indicator of success, in my opinion, later on in life, having that constant thirst to continue to learn more, and it will push you to strive to learn more and take on more responsibilities and grow both with your organization and challenge yourself outside of that. As an example from the path that I have taken, I did the Air Force ROTC program, that's the Reserve Officer Training Corps program at MIT while at Wellesley, and was given an ed delay to attend law school, where I earned my JD. And as I was finishing my last semester in law school, I decided I'd like to get a master's degree. Shout out to King's College. I know we have several alums that also attended. I did my program part-time with the War Studies Department, and I recommend, if any of you are interested in King's program but are planning to go straight into your profession right after graduating Wellesley, but you're also interested in a master's program where there's flexibility, the online War Studies online program gives you that opportunity. It's a part-time program, so it will take longer to complete, but it was the perfect match for me that right after finishing law school and then starting active duty as a military attorney, a JAG Corps officer for the Air Force, that I was able to work part-time on my master's in international relations and contemporary war while still serving full-time as an attorney. And I've now found myself in academia, so I emphasize that point of cultivating that mindset of being a lifelong learner. It is invaluable.
Marissa, I might jump in here because I think I may be the only person on our call who's sort of done this in all of the ways that everyone's describing. So I did do a master's degree right out of Wellesley. I then worked, I did another master's degree, worked, and now I'm doing the PhD in addition to working. And so I can kind of extrapolate a little bit from that experience. I think for me, I felt like the first master's degree, which was in area studies, I did that at the University of North Carolina. I felt like I really needed to kind of build up my Russian expertise. So I definitely had the language skills from our wonderful Wellesley Russian department. But because we have these terrific gen ed requirements that had given me exposure to lots and lots of different spaces, I kind of felt like I really needed to kind of develop my specific Russia expertise a little bit more. And I did get that from the first master's degree that I did. Then was this period of time where I worked in publishing, which, followed the sort of economic collapse in 2009 or in 2008, and had my little self-discovery stint there. Then I really decided I needed to go back and kind of professionalize my interest in Russian, which is what led me to this very specific master's degree in nonproliferation and terrorism studies. So I kind of benefited from this self-knowledge and this, I guess, awareness of what it is that I really wanted to do. And that helped me take the leap of faith to quit my full-time job and go back to school and really decide to kind of do that and know how to do that. And now having, worked for 7 years or so, the PhD felt like the right step for me because, to sort of Jana's point, I felt like I knew the questions that I wanted to ask, the intellectual questions that I wanted to answer. And the PhD, which Rebecca and I are doing, that doesn't really have a sort of coursework component, you're just dissertating, is a great way to do that because you're able to conduct your own independent research to answer those questions that you want. And I'm not sure that I would have been in a position to identify what those burning questions were for me had I done that right out of undergrad. So again, that's not the path for everybody, but for me, it helped kind of capitalize on the things that I was learning to build in education at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you. That's interesting to hear. Different perspectives, different paths, and how you've all done it a little bit differently. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the content of your work and the issues that you're grappling with in the everyday. So from your perspectives, what are some of the pressing issues or emerging themes in your field that students should be aware of, you think, as they're exploring career pathways? Or how would you encourage students to learn more about some of these issues or themes inside and outside of the classroom right now? Maybe things they haven't thought of yet. I think it would be great actually on this one, since you're all doing something different, to hear some thought from each person. So I don't want to put anyone on the spot to go first, but I'd love to hear what you all have to say.
I can jump in here because a lot of the work that we do at CAPE, or I'm doing right now, is very big picture. It's very 10,000 foot. because of where we sit, the questions tend to be very big ticket, very large, sweeping questions. A lot of the focus has been on how are we going to use data in the future, and how are we going to make sure that data is going to get where it needs to go when it needs to go. It needs to get there, which has been sort of a strange question. I'm not a data scientist by training, but I've had to kind of learn a little bit because it's such an important component of what we do. Naturally, whether or not technology is going to make it into the DoD properly is something that's come up in my previous job and before Booz Allen and now is a constant question. And then naturally the big ticket competitors, the ones that you know and love, are very much top of mind for us, and understanding what they're going to do now and what they're going to do 10 years from now. When you're in an organization like mine that makes a lot of resourcing decisions, there's a big future focus. And naturally, no one can predict the future, but there's a real interest in understanding what are the big trends, and understanding not just what you think it is, right? You're like, okay, what military system, like what cool missile are China gonna build? It's more understanding, hey, what are some of the other things that drive the decisions to make or not make big missiles? To oversimplify slightly, but those are a few of them for sure.
I can hop in as well, because I'm thinking about what Jillian was just mentioning about sort of what drives weapons innovation and military innovation, which is certainly something that I spend a lot of time thinking about in my line of work as well. I know that we'll talk a little bit later, perhaps, about what has surprised us about the work that we do that we wouldn't have known when we entered the field. But to preview a little bit, I think the thing that surprised me most is how much we can learn from the past about the challenges that we're facing today. So a lot of my work has actually ended up being historical in nature, at a moment where the relationship between the United States and Russia is in a state of crisis. What can we learn from the Cold War about how the two largest nuclear weapon states have successfully cooperated to either reduce nuclear risk or shore up the non-proliferation regime, or work together in the context of multilateral organizations to prevent things from going off the rails. And there's a kind of fine line to walk there between the extent to which the lessons from the past are in fact applicable in the current threat environment. But I think for me, that's something that I find really intellectually stimulating, but also really informative for the kinds of work that we do. So yes, a lot of that work for me has ended up recently kind of looking at what are weapon systems that developed in the past, what are weapon systems that the Soviet Union contemplated and didn't pursue, what drove those decisions, and what does that mean for kind of what the future threat landscape is going to look like. And I have to just say one more thing, which is that even though the bulk of my work does deal with Russia and the United States, I also lead our Young Women in Non-Proliferation initiative at CNS. And the goal of that initiative is to get more college-aged women interested in our field. So I spend a lot of time thinking about what might make people want to do that, and how can I encourage students who have very different skills and interests to apply them to our space. So I would love to talk to any of you on the line about that if you would like, and I'll put my information in the chat and you're welcome to reach out to me.
So I think one of the things I love about this field is that there are so many different places to go, so many different things to look at, depending on whether you use a 10,000-foot lens or a 10-centimeter lens. And I've kind of, I guess, done both roles where you really focused on one thing, and then roles where, like my current role, where what we are doing research on is very much driven by kind of what our clients want, and what our customers want. And so that often involves someone throwing you a topic that you haven't necessarily heard much about before and going, right, okay, now I got to go figure out what's going on in that space, and consolidating that information for them, talking to experts in the field to try to help, in my case, MOD prioritize kind of one of the big projects we're working on, what are the big tech trends? What are the emerging technologies that are on the horizon? I spend a lot of time trying to also bridge that gap between scientists and scientific publishing and policymakers. As you all know, scientific articles and scientific literature and even scientists are not always easily accessible to lay people, especially if they're very busy. And so translating has actually been something that's kind of run through a lot of my roles. but at the same time, I have colleagues who are working in like a human security area. So looking at domestic violence and conflict zones, looking at, more things that are more engineered toward counter radicalization and countering violent extremism. And then earlier in my career, when I spent about a year in all total living in Turkey, that involved much more looking at issues like insurgencies and terrorism and thinking about civil conflict. So my favorite thing about this field is that there's always something new to look at. There's always something new to learn about. My sweet spot that I found now is kind of defense industry, but there's no guaranteeing that that's going to be where my interest is in 5 years, or even what the field's going to be looking like in 5 years. So it's fun.
So I will chime in that, likewise, like some of the other speakers, I think just like the diversity of subjects in the field is something that constantly keeps me interested in my career, in my job. And I think that's one of the things that really would have surprised like 21-year-old me, that I could sort of become interested in topics that I once would have considered dry, like defense economics. I think just, curiosity goes a very long way. I would say in terms of like pressing current issues and sort of how to keep up with them, I find podcasts to be like just remarkable resources. I listen occasionally to Lawfare, which is just a really good podcast that sits at like the nexus between legal issues and international affairs issues and political issues. And also occasionally Intelligence Matters, which is put out by the former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morell, some of which might be good resources if you're just like curious about the field. And I would also say, like, especially if you have language ability, just like getting out there and reading really good newspapers or watching media in the language you work on is so key. I know that my first few years out of college were spent reading Russian media all the time, and it was like it kicked my butt. It was like really hard to go from using language in an academic environment to that. But it turned out to be just like a really, really key skill. And I feel like I learn and can contribute so much just by watching like my favorite Russian opposition TV station on the internet. And like the things I learned there are like directly applicable to my work. And it's nice to be able to bring that little something extra as a language person to my profession.
To help round it off and building off of Laura's point about the interdisciplinary nature of that, I would say, looking back at my Wellesley experience, the two most beneficial experiences that I've had there that have helped me both in my career now with West Point and with CSIS, but along the way also in the military, was one, doing a UROP with MIT. That's the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Project. I highly, highly recommend that. I did my UROP with Professor Nazli Shukri in course 17, which is political science, looking at the effect of social media as a form to instigate social uprisings and how that can be used also by authoritarian regimes to track the populace. And the second experience was being an Albright Fellow. Those two experiences helped me tremendously on my career path, and the friendships that I made from that, priceless. So I highly recommend that to the Wellesley students on the call. Also, there's something to be said for understanding systems engineering and being able to apply that framework to social sciences. So I am biased because I do teach that at West Point, but it's a skill set that will enable you as an analyst to understand how the constituent parts of a system come together in a whole. And the beauty of systems engineering, it's incredibly interdisciplinary. So you could be a history major or a French major and still be able to engage with this material to understand how systems come together, whether you are looking at how a Boeing aircraft operates, or you're looking at a topical news event. For example, recently it was announced that Russia is developing an AI-powered tool to help, sort of like the Minority Report style, to predict where social uprisings will next occur and how they are training that AI algorithmic set to predict when the next social protest will occur and in what type of protest. Is it more related to, let's say, anti-police demonstrations or a political cause? Is it just a religious gathering? So understanding how for every action there's an equal opposite reaction and there's an ecosystem when new emerging technologies are deployed, being mindful of the economic, cultural, social, economic, technological factors, that ability to flip back and forth from many different academic fields is invaluable. So I highly encourage, again, I'll say MIT Europe, if you have the chance to take a systems engineering course at this stage in your academic careers, go for it. And then the Albright Institute.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, all of you. You'll see Rebecca Gordon has just posted in the chat too for folks who want to learn more about Albright. She's happy to answer your questions. We can always talk about your ops too. That's great. You all had so many wonderful practical tips there, as well as what surprised you and thinking about history and data science and systems engineering and other areas that we may sort of think about, but maybe not. Following up, I'd like to ask quickly, just following up on what Laura shared, I wonder if any of you have go-to resources, like some of the podcasts or suggestions that are good for keeping informed in your particular areas of expertise that students might want to check out.
Well, I have been very shocked by how much people in my field use Twitter, which is something that I think really came as a great surprise to me as somebody who came along a little bit after the big Twitter boom. But that really is a place where, you know, I find a lot of my information, where I stay up to date on what is happening. I think a lot of the think tanks in sort of the non-proliferation or arms control or international security space broadly do post about their events, post news, et cetera, on Twitter. So that's something I've found to be tremendously useful. But I know we're running out of time. One of the specific places I recommend is a blog that one of my colleagues, Jeffrey Lewis, runs called Arms Control Wonk. If you're interested in arms control and non-proliferation issues, that is a great place to stay up to date on things.
Great, thank you.
I'm glad I didn't have to say Twitter because I know it can be controversial, but absolutely Twitter, because you can centralize a bunch of different viewpoints there, and especially with everything we're hearing about disinformation and misinformation, it helps at least me to triangulate a bit better what's actually going on, what do people think about what's going on, what do I need to go dig a bit more on myself to better understand something. The other thing I would say is War on the Rocks is a great kind of highlight of what the conversations are going on in this space and what kind of some of the hot topics are. And the articles do a really good job of linking to some of the kind of underlying documents if there's a topic you want to dig into a bit more.
Great. Okay, and with that, I'd love to turn it over now for audience questions. If you think of any other resources you'd like to share, panelists, please feel free to pop those in the chat.